Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Every Now and Then. My name is Brian Smith, and today we're going to review and discuss the tragedy of Bill and Mary, an Ohio State cold case revisited. The true crime story I'm going to talk to you about today is one of Ohio State campus's coldest homicide cases. However, this story has faded from the memory of the public, and through the decades, the homicide detectives have not been able to solve the case. So we're going to revisit this tragic crime that stole the lives of this young couple. There's a podcast that's been out for a couple years now, where detectives do say they are cautiously optimistic. But we're going to go back to February 27th, 28th, 1970, 55 years ago. William Bill Sproat, he was a graduate student at Ohio State, and Mary Petrie was a third-year College of Mount St. Joseph in Cincinnati. They met through a mutual friend. They were both introverted, devout Catholics. They shared a love of French culture, and that's really how they met. Mary lived in Cincinnati, so it was about a 2-hour drive to come up to see Bill Sproat. They were a young couple, young and in love, really. Because of this connection, Petrie grabbed a last-minute ride to Columbus on a cold Friday, February night. She wanted to spend a quiet weekend with Bill in his campus apartment, about a half a block from the Ohio State campus. I walked past this apartment every week. In fact, I made a visit back in 2024 and visited this house where this true crime occurred. It's within a stone's throw of the Ohio State campus. February 27, 1970, 10 days after the infamous Jeffrey McDonald case, where this Green Beret doctor killed his pregnant wife and their 2 daughters in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And then this happened 10 days later. February 27, 1970 should have been like any other night for this young couple, except it was anything but. Because that night, someone still unknown to this day crept from the shadows and stole the lives of Bill Sproat and Mary Petrie. This person, whoever it was, bound, beat, and stabbed the couple, and then disappeared back into the shadows. That night, 55 years ago. The story of Bill and Mary is now one of Ohio State's oldest cold cases. But unfortunately, the public today doesn't really know about this case. It's faded out of the public eye. A new podcast called Mary and Bill, a Ohio cold case, may bring it back, and I do recommend that my listeners follow that case, try to find it. It's on IdeaStream Public Media, and it was produced by the son of friends of Bill Sproat. The podcast attempted, and I am also attempting to bring new light into this tragic story. And I examined the archives of the Ohio State Lantern. Back in its day, it was a very journalistic publication. It's not really that anymore, but it included archives, interviews with the police and individuals connected to the case. And something got lost in this murder case, which is very tragic, which I want to bring up today on my podcast. And I'm hoping with new technology that the case, even though it's 55 years cold, will bring about some closure for the family. The family that are still alive is very persistent and hopeful that another review of this case will lead police to at least finding out what happened and DNA testing, which was basically non-existent or in its infancy, may also be able to find clues. The sisters of both victims are still alive, and they both say they are not interested in punishment as much as knowing what was the killer's motives. So let's talk about Bill Sproat for just a moment. He was originally from Pennsylvania. He earned his bachelor's degree in French at Xavier University, and he was in his first year as a graduate student at Ohio State when he was murdered. Mary Petrie was a third-year French major, College of Mount St. Joseph in Cincinnati. Fellow French graduate students were interviewed, and they referred to Sproat as a perfectly gentle person, a good, serious student. Bill Sproat, he would travel abroad to France under the Xavier University Memorial Scholarship. One family member said that she spoke to Bill Sproat the Sunday before he was murdered and remembered him promising to introduce his new girlfriend Mary Petrie to the family that Easter. The circumstances of this crime are especially shocking, not to mention confusing, in particular because of the gentle nature of both victims. One family member said he was not a fighter kind of person. He was quiet. He was fun-loving, quiet, conscientious about his studies. Mary Petrie, originally from Portsmouth, Ohio, was in her third year college. She studied even in France under the same scholarship that Sproat had. So that was one of their connections. That may have been how they met. Mary's sister described her as an academic scholar of the family. She even won an award for the best international student for her time abroad in the summer of 1968. Her sister described her as so bright, so brilliant, so intellectual. Her sister Martha said Mary had met Bill Sproat, and he just seemed to fit right into their close-knit family. She also said that her sister Mary was someone with a clear vision for the future, knew exactly what she wanted in life, and said that Bill Sproat was important to her. She had no doubt that they would be married, they would get married, and she was going to teach at one of the Catholic high schools in Columbus, and maybe later both of them would go to France to live their lives. The family struggles with imagining how horrific this young couple, Bill and Mary, last moments were. These deaths shocked the communities, not only on the Ohio State campus, but throughout the communities where the families lived, because they were so gruesome. They even drew comparisons to the Manson murders, where the victims were slain through stabbing and bludgeoning 1 year before the deaths of Sproat and Petrie. And as I said, the Jeffrey McDonald murders, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, were just 10 days earlier. I want to talk for just a moment about the campus safety of Ohio State in the 1970s. Now, after a night out with friends, Sproat's roommate and childhood friend returned to their apartment, and the address is 178 West 8th Avenue, and he opened the door on February 28, 1970, to a horrific sight of Sproat, 22, his girlfriend Mary, 20 years old, deceased. The night before, between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m., investigators believe that's when the couple was brutally murdered. According to police reports, there was a lack of forced entry, no apparent robbery, which supports the assumption the couple knew the assailant. And despite police receiving hundreds of tips in the immediate aftermath of the crime, the case ran cold after a few months, according to the Lantern reports. Now, there's always a possibility of several motives, from a serial rapist to a vengeful acquaintance punishing the Catholic couple for supposedly spending a night together. That circulated for decades. but it ultimately led to nothing. Ohio State's campus was struck by the brutality of the crime. However, violent crime was running rampant in the Ohio State campus area at that time, in particular, sexual assault. So, students, if it's possible, were getting accustomed to that danger. One former Lantern reporter by the name of Lou Heldman, he covered the story when it first unfolded. To this day, he is still shaken up by what happened. And going back over the Lantern archives, these murders were the second and third in the area in the last 3 months. So this was not the first murder in the Columbus campus area. The articles in the Lantern about the murders also talked about a girl previously who reported to have fought off a man who tried to force his way into her apartment. Saturday, Mary and Bill were found. She lived half a block away. Serious crime involving murder, sexual assault, and aggravated assault was rapidly on the rise, not only in the Columbus area, but in particular on the Ohio State campus. This was according to an August 1970 Lantern crime report. So as you can see, they're doing their journalistic duty. In addition to Sprode and Mary Petrie, Mary Margaret Andrews was murdered in 1962, Teddy Selvage was murdered in 1969, and Susan Clark was murdered in 1970. All but one of those cases is unsolved. 1970, unfortunately, was a period of time where Ohio State was detached from student safety in the university area. According to the archives of the Lantern, one Ohio State student said the university area was like the slums. Now, this same Lantern crime report in 1970 highlighted the need for self-defense, as university co-eds in particular were of rape, muggings, and burglaries at an alarming rate. Police encourage women to never walk alone, scream if in danger, and even use defensive tactics to subdue their assailant. The report that I read said, quote, Columbus police consider fingernails one of a woman's best weapons besides her vocal cords. Now, Mary Petrie was sexually assaulted according to the police report. Now, this not only pointed to a possible motive, but obviously it sent a scare throughout the entire campus area. One university employee who lived a block away from the murder told the Lantern the homicides were too close for comfort, and she began carrying chemical mace. She also installed metal and wooden rods in her windows. The severity of the crime was so high that the university started to become involved in campus safety by providing services like extensive lighting systems. They were installed in the campus area, according to the Lantern crime report. But through all that, the case faded as even more acts of violent crime were appearing on the Ohio State campus. It's hard to believe at this time, but that was going on. Now, detectives never considered the case closed. They did affirm 6 months after the crime took place that a lack of witnesses made for little chance the case would be solved, according to the archives. And according to the history books, and I was living through that in 1970, as a 12-year-old, Ohio State and campuses around the country were filled with tremendous amounts of civil unrest. Just a few months after these murders, the infamous Kent State shootings absorbed all the media's attention, along with other tumultuous anti-war protests across the nation. Unfortunately, the murders kind of got lost in everything that happened afterwards. Through the decades, the Sprode and Petrie case has seen many surges of new development, but they ultimately stall. In the earliest stages of the investigation, police were able to obtain what they believed to be the objects used in the murder from the crime scene, including a bowling ball, yes, a bowling ball, and a knife. They also collected DNA from Sproat, Mary Petrie, and a third unknown source. So even back in 1970, they were able to collect DNA, although they probably did not know what they were doing with that, but it's on record. In addition to attempting to extract fingerprint DNA with lead dust, police cycled through several persons of interest, produced a suspect sketch, and even offered monetary rewards in exchange for information helpful to the case. But as decades went on and investigation leads went stale, there was little hope the case would ever be solved. I have listened to the Bill and Mary podcast, and the families of the two victims did not reside in Columbus, but they had a strong sense that the investigative process would take steps even though they could not get answers from the police. One family member did say she only received one letter from Ohio State expressing condolences. Friends eventually left the Columbus area, partially due to the haunting shock of what happened. Although loved ones never stopped searching for answers, they were left with no choice but to keep pushing through their life. According to the podcast, the preserved DNA from the 1970 crime is currently going through analysis through a new investigative genetic genealogy lab to keep ruling out suspects. As of this broadcast today, there are still no prime suspects available. One of the detectives working on the case said, "We believe that there's evidence that given today's technology may have an opportunity to lead to the identity of the people who were responsible for that crime." Now, obviously, 55 years later, any suspect is probably dead or very, very elderly. The roommate who found the crime scene, the one who found the murder victims, became the police first suspect after arriving at the crime scene in the immediate aftermath of the bodies being discovered. And the son said he grew up hearing the tale of the young couple whose lives were mercilessly taken because his parents were friends of Bill Sproat. And the one who found the victims, his girlfriend, now his wife, was an Ohio State student at the time. But it has haunted the families, it has haunted the people connected to this case, and it's considered just as horrible today as it was during the time that it occurred. Some details are still mystifying to this day, such as how could such a brutal murder have taken place without a single person hearing anything? And who was that man that the paperboy saw on his rounds to collect his earnings in that apartment? And would the couple still be alive if Bill had visited Mary in Cincinnati instead of Mary coming to Columbus? What really happened in that apartment on the night of February 27, 1970? We may never know. I am hesitant about giving too many of the exact details about the case. Again, no arrests were ever made. The murders of Mary and Bill were so violent, and then they reportedly involved a kitchen knife, wire hangers, and a bowling ball. As I said earlier, they were compared to the Charles Manson cult killings the previous year. This savage crime of the Mansons did shock the nation. For some reason, this case did not get quite the shock value that the Manson murders did. But now we're in an age of ever-advancing DNA technology, and even though it's been 55 years, there is still new hope that the case can be solved. Police and family members have long speculated that whoever killed Mary Petrie and Bill Sproat may have known them, There was no signs of forced entry into the apartment, and the brutal nature of the killings indicates an emotional component. But Bill and Mary had no apparent enemies. There was an unexpected tip in the mid-2000s saying a religious figure in Mary's life wanted to punish her for her premarital sex. This is a theory that Mary's sister finds bizarre. A woman who shared a ride to Columbus with Mary recalls Mary was adamant about waiting for Bill to pick her up from a hotel lobby, which Mary's brother does find puzzling. So there's something behind that we have never found out about yet. There's also a possible connection between the crime and Mary's travels to France, which has not been uncovered. I also failed to mention that Mary's sister, Martha, was her identical twin sister. There are two other suspects that were ruled out. For whatever reason, they did not match any of the evidence at the crime. But of course, the window for solving this case is closing, as it has now went into its 55th year. After reading the Lantern article and reviewing the podcast, it seems likely that Mary Petrie and Bill Sproat knew their killer, given the lack of forced entry. Now, the brutal nature of the attack suggests strong emotions. Now, it could be revenge, jealousy, or just a personal grudge. There was DNA left behind, so the killer may have acted very impulsively. He didn't plan it as carefully as he thought or should have. Of course, without more details, it's hard to say, but this feels like a crime of passion rather than a random act of violence. Both victims were attacked viciously, and both were strangled. Mary was assaulted, so it could be that more than one person could have been involved, or there could have been a little bit of time between one victim being there than the other one came. What is also perplexing is, why was Mary and another friend dropped off at a hotel first and waiting for Bill? Why didn't they get transportation right to the apartment? That's another one of those little odd bits of information that we seem to get with every true crime story. Something like that does happen. So today I brought you the mystery of February 27, 1970, 20-year-old Mary Petrie arrived at the off-campus apartment of her boyfriend, 22-year-old Bill Sproat. They wanted to spend a weekend together. What followed, though, was unimaginable horror. Their lifeless bodies were discovered the next day, February 28th. They'd been strangled, stabbed numerous times, and each had sustained blunt force trauma to the head as well. No one in the apartment building or surrounding area heard anything strange that night. The sheer brutality of this crime seemed to suggest that the assailant may have known one or both the victims. But who would want to harm these two quiet, well-liked students? It just remains a mystery. Despite the recovery of DNA from the crime scene, this case is cold. No solid leads or viable suspects materialized. I think this is a good place to end our podcast today. Every now and then, we go back in time to reflect, reminisce, and remember. My name is Brian Smith, and we are history. Thank you for listening.